What do you do when the uniform comes off, but the mission mindset doesn't? Welcome to Project Vanguard, where veterans and mission-driven leaders share what it takes to build American energy dominance. I'm your host, Kevin Doffing. Today's guest is Jon Powers, CEO of CleanCapital, one of the nation's largest commercial solar asset owners. Jon served in the Army, later deploying to Iraq, and after a press tour for a movie, he worked in the White House liaisoning with the Pentagon. All of that before co-founding CleanCapital. This was a fun conversation, and I appreciate how Jon is very honest about the gap that a lot of veterans feel when they leave one world and step into the next. You know how to lead, you know how to execute, you know how to handle pressure, but you still have to figure out where that fits in your civilian career. That's what this episode is really about, how energy became real for him, not as a slogan, but as something tied to logistics, security, and everyday life. We talk about what veterans bring into the energy and infrastructure industry that a lot of people still underestimate. There is a practical lesson in here, but there is also a bigger one. You do not need to have every detail figured out before you move. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Let's get into it. Jon, thanks so much for making time today, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, Kevin, thanks for having me.
Well, I'm trying to think back. How did we initially meet? Was it through KJ?
100%. Yeah, Kevin Johnson. Kevin and I go way back in the space, and he was telling me about sort of what you're up to. And, I think there's obviously, for folks that know Kevin Johnson, he's another vet who's been in the space for a long time. He and I actually served together and both sort of got into clean energy after our time in the military.
Yeah, that's right. Man, and now I'm trying to think, how did I meet Kevin? Because I remember the first call we had with him, he's like, wait, so you're interested in policy, energy, and you're a vet? Guy, you just hit Venn diagram. You're probably never going to get rid of me. I was like, I would appreciate another call.
So I'll tell you, Kevin showed up. He's a West Pointer, and in West Point, you do almost like a internship over a summer with a unit, right? He showed up at my best friend's, who was another lieutenant at the time, store in Germany. In the middle, we were having a bit of a party. We became good friends through that experience. We were both in Germany and then didn't connect again for years. And then literally met on a bus in Pennsylvania going around advocating for climate and energy policy. And then ended up being one of our co-founders at CleanCapital.
Was that Operation Free?
That was Operation Free, yeah.
Can you tell everybody what Operation Free was? I didn't even know about this till 8 months ago.
What? Really? That's crazy.
Somebody was like, hey, they're going to restart Operation Free. I'm like, I don't know what that is. And then they looped you in, and I'm like, oh, well, Jon's just going to tell you to come talk to me.
Yeah, I am now for sure. So this could be the whole podcast, but Operation Free is sort of the parallel of my career. When I was in Washington, after I went in the military, and I'll sort of come back, we can talk about sort of how I ended up back in Washington, but I was running a national security think tank called the Truman National Security Project, which was all about training the next generation of national security leaders. I was doing a lot of writing on energy and climate from a national security perspective. Not a lot of writing, actually, but a decent amount of writing. And had written a piece that was published, and I got invited to go testify to the Senate. And to fall back 15 years now, or almost 20 years, this was at a time when climate legislation had passed the House and was bipartisanly moving through the Senate. Bipartisan caucus sort of moving it through the Senate. And my testimony was with a retired senator from Virginia named John Warner, who was a lion of the Senate. He'd been the Secretary of the Navy and also was married to Elizabeth Taylor, who's a fascinating guy on so many levels. I did not know him at the time.
The actress.
The actress, yeah. He became a mentor of mine in Washington, and really, he played in many levels of my career in such a really impactful way. A very classic Republican who really tells stories about the old Washington when, they would debate each other on the floor. Their spouses would be in the back rooms and they all go to dinner together from both parties, right? They weren't running off to fundraise or going on the news to bash each other. They were colleagues as much as they were sometimes different sides of the aisle. But that said, he just retired. He was a big, passionate.
What was that sweet spot for him? Was that the 60s?
70s. I mean, he was a World War II vet, right? He's got a fascinating life story. Had been a World War II vet as teenagers, came back, went to college, became a lawyer. I don't even know how he became a Secretary of Navy. And then we became a senator from Virginia. So years later after this, I was working at the Pentagon and then later at the White House, the Pentagon, I held this forum around energy and energy security, keynoted by Petraeus, right, to give you a sense of scale of the folks that are in the room for this.
Mm-hmm.
I invited Warner to come and speak and open up, and I walked the floor with him, getting him up to the front of the room, and every 3- and 4-star general in there were absolutely had lionized the guy because they'd all had gone through him to get their confirmations, and they just loved him. And it was just fascinating to be in the room and around someone of that stature who really, truly was also incredibly humble and was someone who cared about the issues we cared about. So flash forward a couple more years.
Yeah.
I'm in the White House role, and my job at the White House, I was the federal chief sustainability officer. So oversaw what the agencies were doing in energy and sustainability. But I'd come from the Pentagon. In the White House, not many people understand the Pentagon. So we were trying to navigate some discrepancies between what the Navy was doing and the Defense Department. So the only time I really truly got to spend time in the West Wing was to host a meeting with the Navy team and the Defense Department team. And I purposely invited Warner into that meeting. And so it was in the president's personal conference room, which was, I called my brother afterwards. I was so ecstatic having been in there. I got to sit in the president's chair. I was like, I was in the president's chair. I'm not exactly sure what happened in the meeting, but
This isn't the Oval Office. This is like a big meeting room.
yeah, this is called the Roosevelt Room.
Okay.
And so we're in this like hot debate around the issue we were talking about at the time around biofuels. And Warner shuts down the conversation for a minute and points out Teddy Roosevelt and FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, whose portraits are in the Roosevelt Room, and tells this fascinating story about the Navy and the Roosevelts. And it was a way just to say, basically getting people to like think strategically again and get over your little personal grievances you might have around this issue we're dealing with and think about the big picture. It was just a really fascinating way to watch someone navigate a bureaucratic argument that was unnecessary. He was able to really elevate it and solve the problem. So falling back to this testimony, he just retired. It was his first time back to the Senate. There was a guy named Dennis McGinn who was a 3-star admiral. You know Denny?
No Denny.
Denny was my godfather once I got into this stuff. He's just a great human being. Me, who literally had zero experience testifying, and an oil company attorney. And again, this is early climate debates. So Warner gives this geopolitical, beautiful speech around what's going on internationally. McGinn, who's retired, but gives the admiral version of what's going on strategically. I talked about what was happening in destabilizing states and having to possibly deploy more troops to deal with the folks. I spent 15 months in Iraq. So from the ground troops perspective, and this oil company executive, his immediate response was, we don't need to act until India or China acts, right? It was that classic argument from over a decade ago. And because I didn't know the rules of the testimony, I interrupted him. I literally got into an argument with him. And I'm like, it's my friends that are going to deploy into places like this because we're not doing enough to stop climate change. And became this sort of heated debate. Afterwards, I thought for sure I was going to get scolded. Warner pulls me aside. He said, hey, we need to do more of this. And he and I wrote a paper about what the Defense Department should do, which is what led to my job there later. And then he said, how do we get more vets involved? Well, we had basically partnered with a couple of veteran groups that are involved in political campaigns, launched Operation Free. At the time, there was a massive campaign trying to get this legislation passed. And the goal was to have 100 vets on board. This is the summer of 2009. The goal was to have 100 vets on board at the end of the year. We had 100 at the White House by August. We had well over 1,000 across the country signed up by the end of the year, and 1,000 signed up over that. And we did training on how to advocate for energy from a national security perspective. We had literally 2 biodiesel buses going around Ohio, Pennsylvania, Maine, these targeted states where they're trying to get voters to support this legislation. And literally, Kevin and I got in the bus together at one point in Pennsylvania and reconnected. But we were going to BFW halls, we were going to town halls, we were going to do a bunch of media, just bringing the message of national security into the discussion. And that foundation of Operation Free kept going for a few more years. I had gone into the Pentagon really that next year. And then, Mike Wu, Mike took over Operation Free for me.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And was really sort of quarterbacking it. Yeah. He didn't really take it up. He was running it at the Truman Project.
I know John Monken a lot better than I know Wu.
Yeah. Great guys doing great stuff at their firm. At one point, Kevin, we sponsored a NASCAR team, an ARCA team.
Oh, yeah. No. KJ was telling me all about this. He was so excited. Yeah. No, he loved the NASCAR stuff.
Yeah. We went to Kansas City. We had tens of thousands of people in Kansas sign up to learn more about energy and national security just by being on the ground there and talking about it, and literally having this car that was wrapped in solar panels and windmills in the race. It was just a really cool experience.
Oh, that's awesome. So you go from that. When do you and KJ decide that, hey, we should start this company? It was you two and Thomas, right?
Yeah. So to step back, like my experience in the military, right, or at the Pentagon was the Army's got 3 times the square footage of Walmart, but at the time had no energy policy, right? Whether it be energy efficiency, renewables, natural gas, you name it. It was not a very savvy policy. There was also a lot happening at the time in deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan where people were literally getting killed on fuel trucks.
Yeah, it's like 1 in 8
right?
deaths were like on a fuel convoy.
Yeah, exactly. It was literally the major cause of death in the combat zones. And so we were looking at both the combat zone side of it. So like, how do we use microgrids on forward operating bases to, instead of every base having their own generator, can you put a microgrid in place and use less fuel, right? Strategies like that. We looked at. One of the things I helped sort of work on is around the soldiers deployed in Afghanistan at the time. Every system they were using, from their night vision goggles to their radio, they all used different batteries.
Right.
So there was no way to have like an interchangeable battery system. And so sometimes they had up to 40 pounds worth of batteries in their backpacks, right? Which is insane. So thinking about energy in a new way, on the combat side, I was very focused more on the domestic side. So doing large scale renewables on bases, doing electric vehicles, energy efficiency. That led to the White House rule, which I was doing similar work across the rest of the federal government. But if in any administration, if you drew a circle around the West Wing and the president, 99% of the White House is trying to get to the president, right? They want to lean in, they want to get into that influence circle of the West Wing. I had come from the Pentagon, and really, we're fighting 2 wars. I'm trying to push energy and climate legislative policy at a time we're fighting 2 wars. I had to learn to play what I called 9-dimensional chess to get anything done there. And it was a really fascinating way to learn how to move things into massive bureaucracy. When I got to the White House, I'm like, I don't want to get into that traffic jam of people trying to get to the West Wing. I was very uniquely suited because I was what's called a senior executive service person at the EPA, technically and legally. And that's where I had a budget. So I had a travel budget, which is pretty unique to the White House. So I was in Silicon Valley, and I was in Austin, and I was in New York, and I'm meeting with the head of the GSA in California to talk about what they're doing. But then I'm also going to meet with guys at venture capital firms who are trying to figure out how to get their technologies into the government, right? So like, I got to know the finance space really well. And then in parallel, when I was doing work at the Pentagon, there was a guy named Richard Kaufman who'd been at the Department of Energy. Richard was a former finance guy brought in to help accelerate getting more projects built. He was coming and meet with us at the Pentagon talking about securitizing our power purchase agreements, which at the time, now mind you, this is 2010, 2011.
Yeah.
He was speaking Chinese to everyone there, right? People in the bureaucracy don't understand finance. This is not how it works. And then on top of that, you're talking about PPAs, which power purchase agreements, which in energy now are but at the time were also not common. So I literally bought Corporate Finance for Dummies because I didn't understand what Richard was talking about. And I probably have it on my bookshelf here somewhere. My wife jokes about it, but that was my MBA. Like I started to understand what debt was and equity. And
that's how I learned accounting in my business. Like I had no idea what accounts payable was. I had to go look it up and reread that thing.
Yeah, exactly. I saw the same thing happen to Richard when he would come to the White House since I moved over. Even people on the Economic Council and others, they weren't finance people and understanding the markets. So he and I stood up a clean energy finance working group at the White House to like try to accelerate some of the things that were happening. And when I left government, I knew I wanted to get out of the Washington Beltway bubble. I knew I wanted to go into something more innovative. I first went to a company called Bloom Energy, which was venture funded at the time through the venture firms. And then Tom, my partner, I started co-founded CleanCapital with, his brother-in-law and I had served in Iraq together. So he introduced us. Tom was a private equity general counsel at a firm. And we hatched the idea of CleanCapital. The first person I thought of was Kevin. Like we brought Kevin in as the third original founder, head of tech founder as well, named Mark Garrett, this woman, Zoe Berkery. So when we really launched that company, it was really from a network of folks that we built over time.
Wow. No, I see. I didn't know that. I've known a few of these bullet points, but I guess we've never really walked through the narrative. This is interesting.
Yeah. I mean, KJ and I both had, do you remember there was a movie out? There was a documentary put out that Kevin was super involved with about energy in the military. This is like 2005 14, 15. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. I can't remember the name of it, but yeah, it wasn't Sorkin that worked on that, was it?
Yeah, it was Sorkin, yeah. Kevin was at Canadian Solar, and I was at Bloom. And we got the Renewable Energy Finance, RE Plus, used to call it Solar Power International, to host a screening so we could both go to the conference. We used the screening as a platform to talk about what we had done. The military brought a lot of folks in. At that time, cooking CleanCapital. So we had a bunch of sidebar conversations around CleanCapital. We met our seed investor at that event.
Oh, wow.
At Solar Power International.
Oh, that's fascinating.
10 years ago, which is crazy.
Oh, man. So take me back. How did you end up going into the military? Because you were not West Point. This entire time, I thought you were West Point.
No, I'm an ROTC guy. Grew up in Buffalo, New York. And my dad had done ROTC in the 60s. He'd been ROTC. I signed up for a scholarship my junior year of high school. Did the whole Army, Navy, Air Force scholarship routine and got an Army scholarship and went to John Carroll University on an Army scholarship.
Okay. And when were you in Iraq?
Right in the beginning. So the invasion of Iraq was basically around March, April 2003. First Armored Division I was part of, we were supposed to invade along with Third ID, but the Turkish government wouldn't let us come from Germany into Turkey to invade.
Yeah, I've read about that.
We ended up following to Kuwait and then following Third ID into Baghdad. So I was in Baghdad by May 2003 and then spent a year in Baghdad and then an additional chunk of time down in Najaf, which is just like when Fallujah was happening and that whole spectrum. So about 15 months in total. And then I went back a year later, but as a civilian to do some work for a nonprofit I started over there.
What was that like?
Yeah, it was fascinating. Yeah, so I was an elementary education major.
What?
So I finished Iraq. I was going to be a school teacher. I literally substitute taught when I got out of the Army. I finished my time in Baghdad, and it just happened to coincide with my time coming up for my service. So I got out within weeks of getting back to Germany, moved back to Buffalo, had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I started substitute teaching in my hometown. And there was a documentary made about the unit I served in called Gunner's Palace. It was the first documentary out about the war. This filmmaker lived with us in Baghdad. And we were at one point the most hostile sector of Baghdad, living in one of Uday Hussein's palaces, which is sort of the framework of the movie. And it premieres at the Toronto Film Festival, which is about 90 minutes from Buffalo. The filmmaker invited my family up to see the movie. And at the screening, I ended up speaking on a panel, which is the first time I really ever spoke. Two things came out of it. One, the movie was there and they invited me to be part of a future movie tour, which I'll come back to in a second. And the second one is there was a CNN producer in the audience. And the CNN producer comes up to me and said, hey, we'd love to come down to New York. There was a guy named Anderson Cooper's in the slot now. His name was Aaron Brown. He was the Anderson Cooper of like the early 2000s. So I don't know about you, but when I came home, I was the first vet anyone knew.
Yeah.
Right. And for a long time, it was like, come throw the baseball out at the Little League opening game and, come say the Pledge of Allegiance to this. And there's a lot to be deconstructed there. But I remember the school board invited me to come say the pledge and to open the school board. My mom, who's a teacher in the district, was like, you can't miss that. That's how you're going to get a job in the district. At the same time, CNN wants me to come down to do an interview on the show. And my uncle pulled me aside. He's like, don't be stupid. He's like, you can go say the Pledge of Allegiance anytime you want. He's like, go do this. So I got flown to Times Square. And then what ended up happening is I had zero media training, is we ended up doing 2 days worth of interviews. And they get two primetime segments of this conversation that I had with Aaron Brown. And I remember like staying in a hotel in Times Square. I'm still weeks out of Baghdad.
Yeah.
Right. And walking around just numb, being like, how is this going on here while that's going on over there? And then a friend who was working on the presidential campaign at the time saw it and invited me to get involved in the presidential campaign, which I'd never done. So I went out to Iowa and campaigned in 2004. My dad had just retired from his job as an insurance agent. The election ends. We went to Asia for a month. The two of us, we'd planned this already. I came back and I was supposed to start to get a master's to be a school principal in January of 2005. And the film company calls and said, we're leaving on the movie tour. Do you want to come? And I was like, grad school, movie tour. So
right.
They were willing to pay me a stipend because I literally had no money. I was substitute teaching. So I spent the next 6 weeks traveling the country. I called the University of Buffalo. I'm like, could I come back in the fall? And they said, absolutely. Never went back. Went on this movie tour, spent 26 cities in 6 weeks, military bases, movie festivals, you name it. And it was sort of game-changing and life-changing for me. And that's a whole different podcast. But I ended up, through that experience, starting a nonprofit to go work with kids back in Baghdad. That's how I moved to Washington. Literally got in a U-Haul at the end of the movie tour, moved to Washington and raised money and went back and spent the next 2 years trying to keep 16 to 25-year-olds from being recruited into extremist groups, which was not working, clearly, because we're in the middle of civil war. That was a fascinating period of time, for sure. And going back was very weird.
What was the theory on like keeping them from getting into extremists like groups?
Yeah, so stepping back for a second. Across the Middle East, but specifically in Iraq, the numbers were 64% of Iraqis were under 25 years old, right? I think that compared to the United States, it's like 25% or 30%, right? So across the Middle East, there's a massive youth population. This is in Palestine and Iran, you name it, same. Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
Saddam actually, to his credit, had very strong schools. All the kids went to school.
Mm-hmm.
That fell apart post the invasion. And literally, like, teachers were getting hung in front of their schools, right? So, like, the amount of kids going to school went from over 90% to less than, I think it was like 20 or 30%. I can't remember. I wrote a paper on this, but it was significant delta. And then the price to lay a roadside bomb went from $1,000 American dollars. That's how much they pay someone to do it. They interviewed a kid who was in Abu Ghraib who did it for a pack of cigarettes. Out of school, disengaged kids, you name it.
Yeah.
Inner city Buffalo or inner city Baghdad. They're going to get into trouble. Here, they're getting recruited by extremist groups, and now we see the repercussions of that.
Yeah.
So we were trying to build a foundation of a work-study program. The minister I was working with at the time, who had been the Minister of Youth and Sports, I don't know if you remember Iraq went to the Olympics in 2006, maybe. I can't remember. Maybe 2004. It was a big deal when they went.
That sounds right. I was there when they won. They won like a soccer cup for the Middle East.
Yeah.
And I mean, everybody was excited. And then like, do not go outside because there was so much like celebratory fire.
Just shooting in the air.
It was also like a calm period. So we're like, okay, this would be the moment for the terrorists to like infiltrate and do some things because we're not going to be responding.
Right. Exactly. We're hiding inside.
It ended up being fine, but everybody was like hunkered down inside.
Yeah, 100%. I remember when they captured Saddam, we had to sit inside because there was like bullets raining all around it. But that minister who ran that Minister of Youth and Sports was a guy we were working with. He got killed. This is just years of like all this stuff happening. And so when I got out of that work, I knew I wanted to stay in national security and ended up getting into energy and climate. I got interested in energy in Iraq, but didn't understand that. And so I got involved in it. And then later on, I went back to Johns Hopkins and focused on it academically, but it was because of that foundation of having been over there.
Yeah, no, the story I always tell is like, I'm handing out cans of diesel to like people that are running these small generators so moms can like keep their baby formula cold. But then I'm finding out later that they're not giving away for free. So I'm basically giving them free marginal fuel inputs.
Oh, wow.
And then they're still charging everyone. So everyone's mad at me for propping these guys up.
Yep.
And I can't figure it out. And then eventually I had to be like, what is this? Oh, energy's like running everything. We're getting shot at when we're doing fuel convoys. This 1K generator that I'm running and burning a ton of gas for, I could do with a couple solar panels because I just need a radio and a coffee maker to run a forward operating base.
Yeah, that's right.
Like, I don't need my guy from Kentucky out there kicking the thing, my E6, like trying to figure out how to be a mechanic while we're in combat and getting shot at while the thing's like dysfunctionally running and not realizing.
Sputtering.
Yeah. So much of it I did not realize at the time. I come back to it and I'm like, what were we doing?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I ran logistics convoys, right? Once I moved from being a platoon leader to being the S1, and it was fuel and mail. And then there's 4 propane shops in all of Iraq, all of Baghdad, mind you. One was when I was a lieutenant, the section I was in, it was the only propane station in the area. And Saddam had held all the propane for the army or the Ba'ath Party. So unlike here in the United States where you turn on your oven, everything's driven by these propane cans and no one had any. So we were having mass riots break out over these propanes. So that's a whole conversation, but I ended up helping the guy who owned it create a rationing system on how to get it distributed. And he would literally, about down the road, was having like my platoon over for dinner at his house. He was so grateful. It was a full-time job trying to figure out how to do just that, like manage the propane.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's where I come back to like the all the above stuff. I'm not saying like we don't need fuel. And I think we're going to be embarrassed in 100 years that we burn the stuff that we need for like plastics and things like that. But there are a lot of ways to make an electron. And some of those don't include a marginal fuel cost.
Yeah. There's efficient ways of doing it.
I know. And ever evolving and cheapening ways that have greater affordability and reliability. Man, you've already said it like 3 times. We could have 3 more episodes very quickly off of this. As we close out, what's your advice for veterans that are looking at this industry or thinking about getting into the industry? What's your advice to them?
Yeah. So to step back, like today, I'm the co-founder of a company called CleanCapital. We've invested almost $2 billion in clean energy assets nationwide in 26 states. We have 500 megawatts of solar and energy storage projects under management. I did not think I could do that. And I think when I left government and went to Silicon Valley, when I left the Army, I didn't know what to do. But I quickly realized like the leadership skills I got in the military quickly transferred into other areas. When I got in the government, spent a period doing that, working at the highest levels, like Secretary of the Army's office or Assistant Secretary of the White House, still was super nervous to go to Silicon Valley. I'm like, these guys are going to wipe the floor with me. I don't know. Quickly learned it was just a different language and I could execute. And building CleanCapital, when I look at the foundation of what we started with, I went to guys I knew had served because I knew they had the leadership capacity and ability to do things, be good athletes, and figure it out. I personally am not in the weeds person, right? Like I used to get really uncomfortable being the person that's not spending all the time in the Excel spreadsheet, figuring out what our returns are going to be. But I also realized like that's not my strength. My strength is to do these other things, and we can get the people on board that can do that. And I'm going to go build opportunities, create opportunities, strategically open up new markets, and things like that, because that's where my best time is spent. So if I could look back and sit down with myself, I'd be like, look, you have these skill sets, just go. Like, don't wait. Right? And I think there was no one there to hold your hand when you got out to tell you where to go. Mm-hmm. Some of my friends literally went to manage Kmart's at the time because there was recruiting Army officers to do that, right?
I almost went to do that for Walmart. I mean, like...
Did you? Yeah.
I was mad that I missed out on it. It looked like a sweet gig.
So my dad did. My dad went to Sears. My dad got recruited into Sears. Sears was doing that in the 60s. They're smart companies to recruit from the military. I think so many other companies don't realize it. I've had friends in Silicon Valley now that had been an Army officer or Air Force officers. They've gone now and built and exited 3 different cyber companies. You know, when I talk to them about it, it's like, I didn't have this idea, but the engineer that didn't know how to lead. So I was brought in by the investors to lead and grow and sell and grow and sell. And so like that skill set is irreplaceable.
Yeah. I've talked to some VCs where they're like, do you think you could place more military talent into our opcos? I'm like, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's when we introduced our friends from SitReps. And it's like they built a huge platform of these high-performing vets that have, you know, maybe a little bit of industry experience, but then top-tier MBA schools and just that fire in the belly to go get it done.
Yeah. I didn't realize, like, it was later on when I was going out and speaking, like, in the White House role, I'm like, oh, Stanford has a veterans program? Or Harvard has a veterans program? I didn't realize that until much later.
Yeah. I ended up doing the executive MBA program with Rice University. And I remember moving back here and being at a vets event, and I met 4 different vets that were going to Rice. And I'm like, what are you talking about? That's some snooty nerd school, private school that probably has like 200 people in it total. Because I grew up in Houston, but I'm like, I've never met anybody that'd gone to Rice at that time.
Yeah.
And then all the energy innovation in Houston was going through Rice. And so like I ended up becoming an executive in residence and then did a bunch of stuff. But I mean, like, phenomenal and great network, but the veteran piece is what keeps coming me back. And now we've got a decade of a veteran business plan competition there. And
oh, wow.
I was out with those guys last week, and I mean, it's just phenomenal. They actually have veteran leadership as adjunct professors leading the startup program for veterans. So, I mean, like they're starting to invest into staff, and it's great. And they're not alone, but I think they're the best because I went there.
Yeah. Well, you know our good friend Joseph Kopser, right?
Mm-hmm.
The folks up in Austin, Craig Cummings and his partner, Kelly Purdue, have a fund called Moonshot. And I met Craig years ago when I was running that nonprofit because I got invited to the Army-Navy game. Specifically, the day before, there was a series of events built around all of the alumni of West Point and Annapolis who were in finance and VCs. And it was like, oh, wait a minute. All these guys moved into capital space. I didn't know what that meant at the time. But that's where I first met Craig and then later Joseph. Like there is just a pool of folks out there that have taken their leadership experience and moved it into other industries and are always willing to look at, like those guys invest heavily in vets, right?
Yeah, no, they've been a part of this battle since its beginning.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. No, and I mean, I think, you know, despite cops are being a T-SIP at UT.
Yeah.
That being aside, I also went to A&M. So the network that you can plug into that you don't know exists, right? Like that's the thing. I was talking to a retired colonel getting out of the Air Force a couple days ago to Tech One and Wind in Oklahoma that's going to go with me to this lobby day next week in Oklahoma City. They just don't even know that these things exist. And that's really what we wanted to do with Project Vanguard. So it's not like your LinkedIn messages getting blown up or me running out of time to meet with more people, but like there's just hundreds of folks that we've got on Slack now that are in the industry that are just so eager to help people and have more functional and recent domain experience, right? Like you and I transitioned out a hot minute ago, but sometimes you want to talk to the person who transitioned 6 months ago and they know all the latest and greatest resources and tips and tricks.
Absolutely. And honestly, like the language is still the same, right? Like the experience we all went through is still the same. There may be different paths now, but there's a lot of really well-established folks who've had very similar experiences and value that. They can look at a resume and be like, okay, you manage a battalion. I understand what that means. If you sent that to some other business and they don't, like, what does that even mean?
And then like, please don't sell this as P&L authority because you were a second lieutenant platoon leader.
Right. Yeah. Right. Exactly.
You were not fired if your truck got blown up and caught on fire. Like,
that's right.
Your life was in danger, but nobody was going to like demote you and fire you from your position. Well, probably.
Not at all.
Yeah, we'll see. It depends on circumstances.
I tried to get my battery commander when I was a lieutenant, tried to get my battery commander fired. And it was a very special experience with it. He was absolutely useless. And locking horns at one point in Baghdad. And the funny part was the point that I knew I was right was when the sergeant major pulled me aside.
Yeah.
And was like, keep doing this.
Oh, man. Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, good. That's good. I'm doing the right thing. So,
yeah. No, I fired a couple of senior NCOs. The first one I found out I'm not allowed to do that.
Yeah.
And then he just never went anywhere. That was super awkward. And then the next one I fired, everyone was like, yeah, that needed to happen a while ago.
Well, thanks, Kevin. And thanks for doing this. It's really important.
No, man, thanks. I really appreciate it, Jon. More to come, more to follow. Appreciate all the support you've given to just the whole veteran community that's getting into the industry. You've been one of the pillars of what we've been building here, but also just what's come before and what's going to come after.
Thank you. There's a lot of work to be done, and I appreciate everyone who jumps in and wants to be a part of it. So
awesome. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into the Project Vanguard podcast. This episode sparked something for you. Share it with someone who's ready to think differently. Whether it's about an all-the-above energy approach, how energy security is national security, or the veteran workforce in our industry. If you believe what we're building, a quick review goes a long way. You can do that wherever you get your podcasts. And until next time, keep up the fire.